Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., the Skyjacker who escaped like D.B. Cooper. The passengers of United Airlines Flight 855 sat frozen in fear as a man with a calm but commanding voice announced he had a hand grenade in his pocket and a pistol by his side. The year was 1972, and the sky above Utah was calm, but inside the plane, chaos stirred in silence. His name, Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. He wasn't screaming or frantic. Instead, he spoke with chilling control, telling the pilot to head toward Denver and radio in his demands. Everyone listened as he demanded $500,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. The cabin filled with a tense, suffocating silence as every passenger realized this wasn't a prank. This was a hijacking. The flight attendants, shaking but steady, rushed to obey his orders. McCoy, dressed in casual clothes, looked more like an ordinary traveler than a dangerous criminal. But his eyes, cold and unblinking, told a different story. He had carefully planned this. As the plane neared its stop, McCoy handed over precise instructions. The cash had to be brought to him quickly, with no tricks, or lives would be lost. On the ground, authorities scrambled, remembering what had happened just months earlier with the infamous D.B. Cooper. Another man had hijacked a plane, demanded ransom, and parachuted away into legend. Now it seemed history was repeating itself. When the plane landed in Denver, the atmosphere was electric. FBI agents surrounded the area, but they had no choice but to comply. They brought forward $500,000 in cash and the 4 parachutes he demanded. McCoy calmly collected the bags, checking them with sharp eyes. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. Passengers watched as he worked with frightening precision. Once his demands were met, he ordered the plane back into the air, this time bound for Provo, Utah. The pilots, terrified but trained, did exactly as he said. As the plane climbed again into the dark Utah sky, McCoy made his final move. He walked to the rear of the plane, parachute in hand, money strapped to him in a heavy bag. The wind howled as he opened the rear stairs. Passengers gasped as freezing air filled the cabin. For a moment, he stood there, silhouetted against the night sky, a daring figure about to vanish into darkness. Then, without hesitation, Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. leapt out of the plane. In seconds, he disappeared into the night, leaving the passengers and crew stunned, alive but shaken, wondering if they had just witnessed the perfect crime. News spread quickly across the country. A man had hijacked a United Airlines jet, taken $500,000, and parachuted into the Utah desert. It was like something out of a movie, and the similarities to the unsolved case of D.B. Cooper made it even more shocking. Was this the same man? Had Cooper struck again? Or was this a bold copycat following in his footsteps? Reporters swarmed airports and police stations, hungry for answers. The American public was fascinated and terrified. But who was this mysterious man who had pulled off one of the most daring heists in aviation history? Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. was not some shadowy drifter. He was a 29-year-old Sunday school teacher, a devoted father, and a decorated Vietnam veteran. On the surface, he looked like a model citizen, but inside, McCoy carried a restless ambition and a taste for thrill-seeking that few knew about. He had served as a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, jumping out of aircraft dozens of times. Parachuting wasn't new to him. It was second nature, and that made his crime all the more chilling. It wasn't reckless. It was perfectly calculated. Friends and neighbors later described him as quiet, polite, and deeply religious. No one could imagine him holding a gun on innocent passengers. But beneath the calm exterior, McCoy longed for something more. His military past had left him craving adventure, and his everyday life felt small compared to the battles he had faced overseas. He was clever, skilled, and most of all, he knew how to control fear. The hijacking wasn't born out of desperation. It was born out of confidence. He believed he could do what no one else could, commit the perfect crime and walk away free. As investigators pieced together the case, clues began to point in his direction. While McCoy had vanished into the desert with the money, his planning left threads. Witnesses remembered his face, his voice, his calm presence. Authorities knew he wasn't a random criminal. He was someone with military training. Slowly, the image of Richard McCoy came into focus. Meanwhile, McCoy tried to return to his normal life, attending church, spending time with his family, and going back to his quiet routine. But whispers grew louder. The FBI was closing in. Just days after the hijacking, suspicion turned into action. Authorities matched his description and began collecting evidence. Friends noticed he suddenly had large amounts of cash. Investigators learned he had checked out books on skydiving and even practiced parachuting before the hijacking. The walls were closing in on him, but McCoy didn't panic. He carried himself like nothing had happened, believing his disguise as a normal citizen would protect him. But the law had other plans. Finally, the FBI moved in. Armed agents surrounded McCoy's home in Provo, Utah. Neighbors watched in disbelief as a man they had trusted was led away in handcuffs. He was charged with the hijacking of Flight 855. The evidence was overwhelming: the parachute bag, fingerprints, even handwritten notes of his plan. Yet even in custody, McCoy didn't look defeated. He looked calm, almost defiant. And as the cell door closed behind him, one question lingered in the minds of everyone watching. Would this daring hijacker find a way to escape justice, just as he had escaped into the night sky? The courtroom was packed when Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. appeared in chains. Reporters scribbled every detail, and the jury stared at the man accused of one of the most daring hijackings in American history. McCoy stood tall, calm, and almost detached as the charges were read aloud. The evidence against him was powerful: fingerprints on a magazine he carried during the flight, handwriting analysis linking him to the ransom note, and even skydiving manuals found in his home. The defense tried to argue mistaken identity, but deep down, McCoy knew the walls were closing in. When the verdict was finally read, the room held its breath. Guilty. McCoy was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. Gasps filled the air. Some expected a lighter sentence, given his military background, but the judge made it clear: hijacking a plane and endangering hundreds of lives demanded severe punishment. As the gavel struck, McCoy's family wept, unable to understand how their beloved father and husband had chosen such a reckless path. McCoy was transferred to a federal prison in Pennsylvania. For most inmates, that was the end of the road. But for Richard Floyd McCoy, prison was just another challenge to overcome. He studied the guards' routines, the layout of the prison, and quietly formed a plan. He was disciplined, calculating, and above all, he had no intention of serving 45 years. To him, every locked door was just another obstacle waiting to be broken. The other inmates noticed his calm determination. He didn't rant, he didn't complain, he observed. Slowly, he found a group of prisoners who shared his desire for freedom. They whispered late at night about escape, about possibilities. McCoy became the brain behind it all. His experience as a soldier gave him the discipline to lead. His hijacking proved he wasn't afraid to take risks. In prison, his legend grew, but so did the danger. The guards had no idea that McCoy wasn't planning to serve his time. He was planning his next extreme act. Then came the day that shook the prison system. McCoy and 3 fellow inmates put their plan into action. They fashioned makeshift weapons out of smuggled materials, overpowered guards, and climbed over the prison walls. It was daring, reckless, and unbelievable. Somehow, against all odds, they escaped into the outside world. Sirens blared, helicopters swarmed, and roadblocks were set up across Pennsylvania. But McCoy had done it again. First, he had escaped the skies. Now, he had escaped the walls of a federal prison. News of McCoy's escape spread like wildfire. Newspapers splashed his face across front pages, labeling him the master of escapes. Once again, people drew comparisons to D.B. Cooper. Was McCoy actually the mysterious hijacker from months earlier, or just his most dangerous copycat? Regardless, he had proven one thing: locking him up was no guarantee of safety. Authorities scrambled to track him down, terrified of what he might do next. For days, McCoy and the other escapees stayed one step ahead of law enforcement. They stole cars, hid in back roads, and relied on McCoy's survival training. Each night brought them closer to freedom, but each day tightened the net around them. The FBI was determined to catch him, alive or dead. McCoy, meanwhile, was determined not to return to a cell. He had risked too much, planned too carefully, and believed he could outsmart them again. But the escape couldn't last forever. After 3 months on the run, McCoy's luck began to run out. FBI agents traced him to Virginia Beach, where he was hiding in a friend's house. He knew the chase was closing in, but he still believed he had one more escape left in him. That belief was about to be tested in the most extreme way possible. On April 9, 1974, FBI agents surrounded the home where McCoy was hiding. They called out for him to surrender, guns drawn and sirens wailing. Inside, McCoy grabbed a gun and peered out the window. He had a choice: give up and return to prison for the rest of his life, or fight for freedom one last time. Neighbors ducked behind cars as the tense standoff escalated. The man who had leapt out of an airplane into the Utah desert and scaled the walls of a prison was now cornered, his options shrinking by the second. Then, without warning, shots rang out. FBI agents stormed the house, shouts mixing with gunfire. In the chaos, McCoy fired back, determined not to be taken alive. Bullets ripped through walls, glass shattered, and the battle reached its deadly peak. And as the smoke began to clear, the fate of Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., the hijacker, the escape artist, the man some believed was D.B. Cooper himself, was sealed in the most violent way imaginable. Richard Floyd McCoy Jr.'s story is one of daring ambition, careful planning, and a restless hunger for freedom that ultimately led to his downfall. From hijacking a plane and parachuting into the night to escaping from a federal prison, McCoy seemed unstoppable. Yet his choices carried a heavy cost. In the end, his brilliance and boldness could not outrun the law. His tale remains one of the most dramatic true crime stories in American history, forever linked to the legend of D.B. Cooper. McCoy's life proved that even the boldest escapes can end in tragedy.